Yes.
Like 1 minute.
I might do a drawn-out introduction. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing? It is 3:58, so I'm gonna kind of talk real slow, just in case anyone needs to come in at 4. All right. Well, I'm Amari. I'm the community life coordinator. I don't ever introduce myself too much because I assume people see me running around and they've learned, but that is who I am. And today we have a wonderful performance with a person who is long-standing, one of our favorite people to always bring back to the forest, Mr. Robert Buxton. He has been here a couple times. Yes, this is man. He has been here a couple times. I know we have a couple of new faces, of course, who may have not experienced him yet, but you are about to. Before we get started, we always like to remind everyone to please turn off all your devices or silence them. And then if you need to enter or exit out of the auditorium, please feel free to use the back exit door. Once again, we are so happy to have him here, especially for just a small afternoon and an hour of music. So without further ado, everyone, this is Mr. Buxton.
Yes, thank you, Amari, and thank you all for being here. Thanks for having me this early evening, late afternoon. I'd like to start by improvising something for you because, improvisation is a lost art in classical music. You think of it in jazz, maybe. But if you go back 200 years ago, well, they all improvised. Liszt, Beethoven, Chopin. So why did we stop? I don't know. I don't know why. You could say improvisation is where a lot of this music that we call classical music comes out of. So if you wouldn't mind to help me, I just need a few random notes. Okay. Yeah, you were okay, very good. I need which is what? Oh, La. Let's call it A, La, okay. So F sharp A, any others?
B.
B. Let's have a few more to make it interesting.
E, F.
Okay, that is interesting. That's a little 20th century there. I like it. Okay. Thank you very much. And the last few times that I was here, I played arrangements because I like doing arrangements. I like to pretend to be something I'm not a pianist, something else. And the first piece is from an opera by Gluck, G-L-U-C-K. He was a composer in Vienna in the mid-18th century. Opera composer, mainly. And this is from his opera, Orfeo, Orpheus, which is based on the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, which recall is about Eurydice dies, she goes to the underworld, And Orpheus can't accept this, so he goes after her to bring her back. He pleads with Hades, and he actually brings his harp, his lyre, spelled L-Y-R-E, not L-I-A-R, just to be clear. And you know, this is why musicians, composers have loved this myth, because it's a musical myth, right? So Hades allows Orpheus to take Eurydice with him with one condition: don't look back. You've probably heard that line before. It's in the Old Testament, in the Bible. So unfortunately, Orpheus looks back at the last moment. They're almost back to Earth from the underworld. He turns around, loses her forever. But the early 1760s, when this was written, was kind of the age of enlightenment. They didn't like this sort of end. So actually, in the opera, I was really shocked when I saw it at the Met a long time ago. And Eurydice just comes back, and they have this big party, and everyone lives happily ever after. So it's nice that way. It's a positive conclusion. So, but this piece is the melody from the Dance of the Blessed Spirits. It's an instrumental interlude with some dance, with some ballet in it. The original is for flute and strings. And this is a piano transcription arrangement, reimagining by Italian composer Giovanni Scarlatti, which is just such a beautiful name, 19th century composer. And his style is very 19th century, so maybe the purists of 18th century music might not like the 19th century affects here, but that's what I like about it. I mean, why not? So this piece is one of these things that used to be more fashionable a long time ago. Like, it was more fashionable 200 years ago to do improvising in a classical piano setting. So same with playing an arrangement of an excerpt of an opera. It's a little bit of an oddity nowadays, but again, like going into an antique shop, that's what I like about it. So here is Gluck Scambati melody from Orpheus. play something that's maybe pretty familiar, but maybe the version is not so familiar. This is Ave Maria, but I'm so sorry I can't sing. I wish I could. This is a solo piano arrangement by Franz Liszt, and Liszt in many ways is the master, one of the great masters of piano arrangement. You know, arrangement is, maybe I said this last time I was here, but I really think of it as literary translation. It's the same idea. It's not so easy to just do a word-for-word translation of something. By the way, that last one was not, obviously, because that would be Google Translate. If you take a text, like if you take the Iliad or something, and you do word for word, it's not going to work. You have to make it speak in the new language that it's being translated to. And so that's why, you know, arrangers will take like liberties with things to make it idiomatic for the instrument, to make it work. So if I were to sing this, well, you might expect me to sing it in Latin, right? That's what you probably heard in this. But when you see people for dinner tonight, you might tell them that Schubert did not write it with that Latin text, the Hail Mary prayer. He did not use that for the original piece. He used an excerpt of a poem by Sir Walter Scott called The Lady of the Lake, translated into German. Of course, that original text is also a prayer to Mary, but it's a different text. And people have, you know, taken to singing it with the Latin text. I think it works beautifully too, but that's not what Schubert did. You know, Schubert was born in 1797, died in 1828. Think about it. He was 31 when he died, only. And he was very ill most of his later years. And he knew it. He knew his time was limited. He would write so much music, even 3 or 4 lieder or songs in one day. And when he died, he was penniless and unknown except to a small circle of friends. You heard of the Schubertiads in Vienna. They would have these musical evenings of his music. That was a small circle of people. Well, it was kind of Liszt who popularized Schubert after his death. Liszt discovered some of Schubert's lieder, including this one, and arranged it for solo piano, and played them at his early recitals in the 1830s, and he really popularized Schubert. In many ways, we can be thankful to Liszt for that. You know, Liszt, I used to believe this, and I don't anymore. I used to believe this idea that Liszt was a superficial showman, and it's just not true. Well, he could be, but there was much more to him than that, so much more. And you know how he started his, solo touring and performing as a pianist, and he started because he wanted to raise money for a Beethoven statue in Bonn. So there was a great philanthropist in him. There was a wonderful human quality to Liszt, that he would promote people, and there was a great warmth to him. So what he does with this beautiful song, this lead by Schubert, is in the beginning he gives you the music pretty straightforward, like what Schubert wrote. He doesn't change it that much, but then you have another verse. So that right hand business, that ain't Schubert. That's Liszt. He added that, and it's not him adding showy things. It's because if you're singing, the verses change, the words change, but the music stays the same. But if I played the same music over and over again, just without words, it could be, repetitive. So what Liszt does is he changes the way it's written. He adds some things and makes it different, in the next verses, so to create variety that way. So anyway, here is Schubert Liszt, Ave Maria. Just rearrange some of this in here. There we go. So next, more arrangements. I've been working through different arrangements of Paganini's music because I'm obsessed with the violin. It's one of my obsessions. Vocal recordings, especially the older, really old ones. And same with the violin. And at some point I even considered switching to the violin, but my wife, who's also a pianist, wisely talked me out of it. So I'm sticking with the piano and trying to play everything possible that there's a version of for violin. So Paganini, he was like the Jimi Hendrix of that time. I mean, I'm not kidding. He was a wild man and very controversial in the early 19th century. There were many people who thought he was possessed, really. There's a similar story in the US with the blues musician Robert Johnson. People believed that he sold his soul to the devil for his musical abilities. So this is an old myth that some musicians become attached, or that myth gets attached to them somehow. Now, the younger generation, the romantics like Liszt and Schumann and Chopin, they just admired Paganini. They wanted to be like him, and they wanted to emulate him. And it was Schumann first he heard Paganini in the 1830s, and then he did many arrangements of Paganini's music for solo piano. Actually, he took 12 out of the 24 caprices by Paganini, and he adapted them, arranged them for piano. I don't know why he did 12, not all 24, but I'm grateful that he did as many as he did. These are not played as much as Liszt's 6 Paganini studies, but I think that they're wonderful pieces. With the Schumann, I'm going to play number 11 right now, so it's almost the last one of this set. The first, 1 through 6, the first half, Schumann doesn't change a whole lot of Paganini's original music. What he did was he takes the one line of solo violin music and he just maybe adds some accompaniment, and he doesn't change it all that much. It's still wonderful. But his purpose in doing that, Schumann said, was pedagogical. He wanted to just be close to the original. But in the second set, from which this is from, Schumann's personality takes over a lot. To the point that I don't really hear Paganini too much. I hear Schumann. And Robert Schumann was, one of the most fascinating composers and people of the 19th century. He had bipolar disorder, what probably was bipolar disorder. And they didn't have much understanding of what that was at that time of treatment. So he truly suffered a great deal in his life. And I think in some way you can hear it in his music. His music is not always easy listening. And for example, this piece I'm going to play, it strikes me as kind of manic. The original piece by Paganini, that's what the original piece is. It's very similar to La Campanella, also by Paganini. And that is a technical challenge for the violinist, moving the bow between different strings. I don't play violin, that's about as much as I can do. But what Schumann does with it is he transforms it. I call it a manic monologue, is what it sounds like. Let me show you what I mean. It's different. It's completely different that way. Somehow, it just has a different atmosphere. Suddenly it's not Geneva, which is where Paganini was from. It's Leipzig, it's Zwickau, it's rainy and cold. That's where Schumann was from, what's now East Germany. So, Schumann was also a very literary person. He wanted to be a novelist at one point, inspired by E.T.A. Hoffmann and other writers of that time. He created these characters that were alter egos for himself. And many people say now that this is the two parts of his bipolar disorder. Florestan was the over-the-top, passionate extrovert, like this piece. And then Eusebius is the opposite. Eusebius is the depressive, the sad, the bluesy character. And I'm going to play you then a piece in that vein. So here is one of Robert Schumann's Paganini studies in B minor. piece almost doesn't breathe. It's like it doesn't have punctuation almost. It's like there's no commas, there's no semicolons. It just goes and goes and goes. And the next piece is just the opposite completely. This is Abendlied, Evening Song, by Schumann. This is an arrangement by Saint-Saëns, the French composer Saint-Saëns, because the original is a four hands piece. And usually you hear this on violin or cello or something. So this is from Schumann's later years. What you just heard was from a young Robert Schumann, actually from this, he said it was an extended manic phase he was in the 1830s, which was partially the result of the fact that he couldn't marry. He and Clara Wieck, the daughter of his piano teacher, Frederick Wieck, they couldn't get married, they wanted to. Frederick didn't allow it because he thought Schumann was a crazy bohemian beatnik or whatnot. I don't know if they didn't have beatniks back then, but whatever. He didn't allow it. But finally they got married, and Schumann's music actually calmed down quite a bit. He wrote many song cycles, like Schubert did, like the Widmung, And that's maybe next time I'll play it. I'm working on this beautiful piece. But you can already hear from that much it's a different character. As his music became more, like domestic. He became a more domestic person, and in their lifetimes, Clara was much more famous than he was. She was a great composer, pianist. Actually, fortunately, many people are playing her music more today. I ought to. I haven't played her music yet. And so that leads me to believe that Schumann in some way was kind of like a stay-at-home dad sometimes. They had 7 children. I don't think all of them survived, but what I mean by saying that is that he was a wonderful father and a wonderful husband, and he took on fatherhood not as a chore, but actually as a creative thing. I read some biographer said that he relived his own childhood raising his kids. And that's why many of his late pieces have that theme of childhood in there. Oh, it's okay, that was wonderful comic relief. I wonder if I can do an improvisation on it. I don't know, maybe next time. So, this piece from Schumann's later years reflects that. It's from a set of pieces called Music for Children, Young and Old. That's the suite that it's from. And finally, unfortunately, I want to say that Schumann's health really started to decline in the early 1850s. He heard voices. He actually heard the note A ringing in his ears. And that's why much of his late music is in the key of A minor, like the piano concerto, No, wrong octave. Is that A? It's all over his music. He may have had lead poisoning, that's another story, but I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but some people found, they analyzed his hair or something they found. They also found Beethoven had lead poisoning from drinking a cheap wine from a certain area of Austria. It's kind of interesting to think, he's horrible, but anyway, Schumann jumped into the Rhine River in February, middle of winter, and he was rescued by fishermen, and then he went to an asylum, which in those days was more like a prison than anything. No visitors allowed. He couldn't speak even. And actually, Clara snuck in eventually after 2 years, spent some time with him. I think the day that she visited him, he died, or a day later or something. He died at 46. And so it's horrible. And this piece is one of those pieces that he wrote leading up to that time. You might expect that he would write something that's emotional and torturous and angry, or no, it's the opposite. It's just complete placid music. And it's very haunting. Sometimes it's being too calm is not good. Like, I know this guy, he's 100 years old, he's a World War II veteran, and I saw him around the holidays. He was in that eerily calm mood, and I was sad to see him like that. He wasn't feeling good, and he even said something like, I don't have it in me anymore. So I felt so sad. And then I saw him 2 weeks ago, and he was all upbeat and giggling, and I said, you're looking great. And he said, you must be wondering, do you know what happened to me? I said, what happened to you? He said, I got into 4 arguments with people this week, and it brought me back. No, not that I recommend that, but a little conflict is good. in a way. And this piece is like, has the absence of that. So anyway, this is Abend, lead evening song by Robert Schumann. I don't want to make you late to dinner or anything. Thank you. And I think that it was after 1848, music changed. The Romantics' music changed. Because 1848 was this year, I don't know enough of the history, but it was a very tumultuous year with revolutions and political upheavals. You could say it was similar to like 1968 in this country. And there was a lot of disillusionment, I think, after 1848. And I can hear it even in that piece somehow. And in the next piece as well, this is a work by Liszt, a famous piece, The Consolation Number 3, from 1849, right, 1 year after 1848. And this piece is uncharacteristically introverted for Liszt. You don't expect him to be so introverted. But today I'm playing this introverted arrangement of Ave Maria. Well, some of it was introverted. And then, and this piece of Liszt. So Liszt was in this generation of romantics. He was born in 1811, Chopin and Schumann were born in 1810, Mendelssohn born in 1809. And you know, Liszt outlived them all. And this piece he wrote right after Chopin died. And it's in Chopin's style. I'll play it for you a little bit. It sounds like a nocturne by Chopin. Especially here, that flourish right there, straight out of something by Chopin. But he's not copying Chopin. He's paying his respects to him, his tribute to him. They were friends, they were colleagues, they were both from Eastern Europe, Chopin from Poland, Liszt from, well, what's now Hungary. And they lived in Paris and they connected, you know, that actually though Chopin, and I'm sorry to say this, I've been reading some of his letters, he was not always the most pleasant person, Chopin. He could be very acidic and prickly, and he looked down on a lot of people, including Liszt. He really looked down on Liszt. I don't think Liszt felt that way about Chopin. Liszt actually learned a lot from Chopin, lyricism, sensitivity, because I think Liszt had the equipment from the beginning, you know, the technical equipment, but he learned that poeticism from Chopin and Schubert too. But Chopin didn't really look up to Liszt too much. There's a story about this, that Liszt was playing some of Chopin's music in a concert, and Liszt was adding things. He was adding improvisation, embellishment, which is what everyone did at that time, even Chopin himself. But I think that Liszt must have been so excessive with his, you know, embellishments that Chopin pulled him aside and he said, if you're going to play my music, you should play it. Don't mess it up, something like that. So they were friends and somewhat rivals in a way. But this is Liszt's tribute to him. So, yeah, the word consolation, consolation, comes from a poem by Alphonse de Lamartine, who's a poet at this time. Liszt liked these things. He liked to write a piece of music and say, this is based on this poem or a painting, or, you know, Liszt wrote the Dante Sonata, which is an unbelievable piece, and we'll play it one day, based on the Divine Comedy. So it's programmatic music is what it is. So here is the consolation number 3. So I just learned it, so I can sort of do it. Yeah, good piece. Yeah. Well, here's another work, a longer piece. This will be kind of the main course tonight. This is the Brahms Paganini Variations, Book 2. So another piece based on Paganini. And you know, Brahms was a little bit younger than all of these people. He was born in 1833, but he knew them well. And let me start by explaining his connection to Liszt, which was not much of a connection, because Brahms, as a young man, was traveling around Europe. He was looking for advice with his early compositions. And one of the places he went to was Weimar, probably in the 1850s. Yeah, so after this piece was written, or even 1860s. Yeah, so he met Liszt in Weimar. Liszt was living there, conducting in Weimar. And now I've told you Liszt was a wonderful person. He was a philanthropic person and everything, but he was a bit of a show-off, it's true, especially by this time. And so the young Brahms stops by, shows his music to Liszt, and Liszt says, "Oh, that's wonderful, but let me show you one of my pieces. I just wrote it, the B minor sonata, which is is a masterpiece, but it's very, very, very long." And Brahms had been, you know, traveling by horse carriage for days. So he fell asleep, Brahms. You can imagine Liszt was not thrilled with this. So they never really met after that. They never really reconciled. I think Liszt was pretty furious about that. But then another stop that the young Brahms made was to the Schumann's home in Dusseldorf, where Schumann was trying to make it as a conductor too, but it wasn't quite working for him. And by the way, I mean, I don't know if it was not working, socially, like apparently his social skills weren't such that it made him a suitable conductor. I don't know. I'm sure he was a good conductor. He was a genius, but Brahms showed up, he knocked on their door, and Clara Schumann, you know, let him in, and, you know, he played some of his music for them, and they said, "Oh, you're a genius, why don't you just live with us?" You know, so they almost like adopted him. People didn't do background checks in the 1850s, but I don't know. Now, this was around the time that Robert Schumann had his mental breakdown and was institutionalized, and Brahms was there helping out with the family, with the children, and helping Clara. So there was an age difference. Clara was about 15 years older than Brahms, and you probably heard the famous, which is probably a rumor, that there was something going on between them. And this started, you know, because when Schumann died, when Robert Schumann died, they went on an extended trip to Switzerland to escape, to process the loss, I think. But the neighbors at the time were suspicious that this is really strange, this young man and this older lady, they must be, you know. And it's to the point that there's even a movie, a Hollywood movie from the 40s about this. Katharine Hepburn plays the role of Clara Schumann, and as great an actress as she is, from what I understand, it's just not true. It wasn't that way. Now, they had some unrequited feelings for each other, I'm sure, and I was also reading that both of them destroyed many of the letters that they'd written. So, I mean, that's also kind of suspicious, but I really don't believe that it was the sensationalized view of it. It's just like, for example, that movie, it's a great movie, Amadeus. It's a great movie, but it's terrible history. It's not true at all. You know, Salieri that's actually one of my projects, is to learn some of Salieri's music, because he's a great composer, and he had nothing to do with killing Mozart. It's complete nonsense. I'm serious, yeah, it's nonsense. I kind of feel bad for him. You know, listen to his operas, it's unbelievable. But it's this myth that's stuck. And then the same with Brahms and Clara. I read that actually Brahms he had an incredibly boring life. You know? He likes to compose, and he likes to take long walks in the Vienna woods. He lived in Vienna eventually. You know, even in his later years, he had this big beard. He looked like Santa Claus. You know, I saw a gentleman on a Harley Davidson motorcycle that looked wrote just like him over the summer. I was about to tell him, and my wife, stopped me. She said, you might not, this might not end well. So, but anyway, this piece, the Paganini Variations, it's based on the famous 24th Caprice of Paganini, which incidentally Schumann did not arrange. Liszt did, but. And what Brahms decided to do was to write a bunch of exercises. I call them finger torture because they're really. And then somewhere along the way, he realized that they're more interesting than exercises, they're better than exercise. So he just changed the title to Variations. Now, he would always seek Clara's advice first, but for some reason, he didn't listen to her here. She hated this piece. She called them wretched witches' variations, which I think in the mid-19th century was about the worst insult you could possibly think of. So, here's the piece, and what I want you to think about when you listen is, he was, 29 when he wrote this, or 30, and some of the variations, even though most of it is pretty, fiery music, fire and brimstone, that there's some quieter parts where you might feel that his unrequited feelings for Clara, maybe, I'm not trying to be People magazine here, but there's just something there. There's something in Brahms' music. I think that's the tension that makes Brahms difficult to play, but also so rewarding, is that on the surface, he's cold and reserved. Some people say that about his music, but when you listen a little more deeply, it's a volcano of feelings, and it's that tension between the two. He's like, maybe people like this, that are very formal and guarded on the surface in their behavior, but the real them is nothing like that. So, this is, here's the piece, Paganini Variations, Book 2 by Brahms. I mean, you tell me it's just 5 right now. Are you gonna be late if I do one more, or is it okay? Okay, because I thought I was done. That's great. Thank you. I want to close, so, this is a funny story that I tell all the time. I have 2 immigrant parents. My mother's an immigrant from the Soviet Union, and so she raised me on, classical music. And my dad is also an immigrant. He grew up in Southern Virginia, and raised me on this old-timey gospel music, which I play a lot of. And that's the explanation for why I do that both. So I want to close with an old gospel song, "Where Could I Go?" And what is Southern gospel, American gospel? It's a mixture of old hymns from Europe, spiritual, Scotch-Irish music. It's all mixed together into one melting pot. That's the best of America, I think, is when it's a melting pot. So here is a little gospel to close. And thank you all very much, for having me. It's great to be here, always.
Oh, yeah, of course. I played in the past. But just, yeah. We'll do. We have to start. I want to keep it